So here I've got a pair of MonoX power amplifiers, and these are here for my signal path upgrade. So we'll get that done. However, the owner mentioned that these were recently serviced by Cyrus, and this is one of two pairs that had serviced with Cyrus very recently. And when I look inside these amplifiers, they're maybe not quite what we would expect. So let's just take a look at what the service documentation says. All right, so here's the service report for one of these amplifiers, and I'm recording this. This is the middle of July 2024, and so we can see that this unit here was serviced by Cyrus on the 21st of November 2023. So it's like 6 or 7 months since this guy was serviced here. And if we look at the actual what's been carried out, I mean, this is just a standard tick box kind of report here, and there's not too much detail on it. But if we look at the serial number is 404. So let's remember that when we actually look at the unit. So 404, and again, it was done on the 21st November. And you can see that this is for service. And so we've done a visual inspection and we've done a PCB inspection, and then there's a bunch of the tests down here. So we've got a bias adjustment reset to factory. This is power supply check, and then the distortion check, and there's a production test, and then the last one is soak test. These are just off the side of the picture that the owner sent me here. So that's what these guys are, but clearly we've done visual inspections, and we've we confirmed that our power supplies are as expected, etc. And not so long ago. So let's now take a look inside this unit and we'll see what we find. Alright, so here we are looking at the underside of the unit there, and we can see the serial number that we saw on the report there, CERS 0404. So let's now remove this cover and we'll see what we see inside. And remember, one of the items on the service sheet, never mind all the technical stuff, but the first thing was PCB inspection and visual inspection, etc. And as soon as we take these covers off, I can see that these two capacitors here, they're both bulging, and they're both showing some signs of leakage there. So looking a bit closer inside here, and we can see these are the two low current but high voltage supply reservoir capacitors there. They're clearly bulging, they're clearly leaking, and I mean this is immediately in front of your eyes as soon as you take the covers off the unit. So in terms of a visual inspection, it's kind of it's an immediate fail. And these capacitors always fail. These are running at their maximum rating. They're running at 100 volts, and they're 100 volt capacitors, so there's no overhead, and they always fail. And so clearly this has never had any attention during the service, and this is deemed acceptable somehow. And there might be an argument, well, that's just happened in the last few months, and no, this has been like this for a long time, and it's just never seen any attention. And we can see some other examples in here that are quite obviously in need of attention. Let's take a look at that. Alright, so here we are looking further inside the unit, and we can see these capacitors along here in a row, and they're sort of jammed up against these hot regulators here. These regulators are running very hot because, again, they're running on their limit. And if we look at these 5 capacitors here, you can see this sort of brownish tint to the plastic casing there. Now these capacitors here are the same as these ones here. So this is in a much cooler area, and these guys have got much more like their original colouring. And so just looking at these guys, they're expired. And this row of capacitors here, I always find them to be dry. When you're looking at these amplifiers, these are guys you just automatically replace because they're in this hot environment. They're working hard, and you know, the life expectancy of these guys is very, very short. And so for any kind of service that I would do, these are just automatically replaced, as well as these two guys here that we can see the gross failure in. So this is an amplifier that's been serviced by Cyrus 6 or 7 months ago, and this is what you find inside. And it's maybe just not what people are expecting. You know, you go to your main dealer and you ask for a service, and I think my expectation would be that you've got something that's tip top, and you know, I'm just not sure what we're getting here for this service. And the owner here, 4 units they sent in for service, cost £1,300 something, and you know, you're getting back a unit that's got bulging capacitors clearly leaking, and you know, this unit's never going to be performing to its best. And if we look at some of the recent documentation from Cyrus on their newer stuff, they make a lot of noise about the importance of power supplies, you know, and how they must be super duper, and that everything else comes off of that, you know, and that's fair enough. What does that then mean for what we see here? You know, it's like when we're looking at older equipment, we discard that, and that's just not right. I'm going to go and make some measurements on this amplifier now. We'll see how they look, and then, you know, as we mentioned that originally, these are here for my signal path upgrade, and they're going to get a proper service when we're doing that. Yeah, so begin to make some basic measurements here, and things are even more obviously bad than initially thought. You know, even sometimes when these capacitors are leaking, they've still got some functionality. But when we look at it here, there's just this guy here is completely dry, and the circuitry here is related to the minus 70 volt rail. If we measure that minus 70 volt rail here, there's a little test strip along the side here, and we can see we're only measuring 56, 57 volts, and that's because this capacitor basically isn't there. It's you know, not functioning at all. If we look at the input to the regulator here, we can see I'm supplying it with a DC level of 68. If we look at the ripple on that, it'll be 26 volts of ripple, and we're trying to generate a very clean 70 volt rail from that that's gonna, you know, drive the rest of our amplifier circuitry and really define how this thing behaves overall. So really, this is just probably one of the worst ones I've ever seen, and having just been allegedly serviced, then there's some real questions to answer here. I'm going to put a scope on this. We'll look at some of these waveforms in more detail before we put it on the audio analyzer. Here we are with the scope then, looking at this. Should be a minus 70 volt supply, and if I've got my zero line here, 1 square up, we've got 20 volts per division. So the bottom of the screen is minus 100 volts, and if we power up, we can see there that we are sort of getting to the minus 70, but then, you know, as the main cycles, this capacitor is just not doing its job, and we're not got a steady DC there. So this is pretty horrendous. You know, this is going to be very audible, easily measurable, and you know, this amplifier is nowhere near doing what it should do. And this waveform is with the unit in standby, so when we power up, we can see an even more horrendous waveform there. So it's just going to sound, I mean, I don't even know how this amplifier is listenable, never mind passing any kind of service test. Let's look at the input to that regulator then, and here we are here. So we're going off the bottom of the screen there, so we're more than minus 100 volts, and we're going up to 0. And we should have a flat line about the minus 100 volts here in order to generate our nice 70 volt rail. It's just not happening. So this, as I say, it's going to be very audible and very easy to measure. So let's look at this in the audio analyzer now, and we'll just see what it looks like. Right, here we are looking at the audio analyzer, then looking at the output spectrum of this amp, and I'm staring at this in disbelief really. You know, at 100 Hz, we've got over a volt of ripple, And you know, that's not entirely surprising when we compared to the scope plots that we just saw. But how this escapes anybody's ears or gets through a service routine is just beggars belief, really. You know, this is just completely unlistenable, completely unusable, and I certainly wouldn't be connecting my speakers to this thing. What we should have is a flat line somewhere down about the 110 mark here, and we're obviously far away from that. Anyway, this is what we have, and so I'm going to go in now and start to take this thing apart. We'll start to do a proper service, and we'll start to put our signal path upgrade in there, and we'll come back and compare with the measurements afterwards. So I'm still scratching my head on that spectrum that we just saw there. But you know, I think we've seen enough here, and we need to start moving on and correcting some of the things that we're looking at there. And I have a separate video on servicing these amps, so I'm not going to go into huge detail here. We'll just capture the highlights. But the first thing is we'll get this board out. We'll start to get some of the parts off it that we're going to replace. We'll maybe measure some of them, see, and just show how bad they are, and then start putting it back together. So let's get this board out. Here we are then, the board's out, and we've stripped all of those low level capacitors, taken out this little daughter board as well. We're not going to be using that when we put in our own little board there. And the board's been cleaned up. We're ready to recap that now. Let's just measure some of these parts we've taken out, and these were the main issue ones here. And if we measure this guy here, it's I'm not even getting a response on the meter there. It's just completely dry. Its neighbour, it's not quite as bad. It's still showing a decent ESR there, even though it is leaking and it's clearly on its way out. This guy's just had it. And then there's all these lower level ones that we saw the discoloration. So these are the two. These are the same capacitors, but these are discoloured because they were more in the heat. So if we measure one of them, again, just the slightest nudge on the meter there. And if we look at the ones that were in the away from the regulators, still bad, but you know, not completely gone. And then these other guys here, again, just nothing showing there at all. So these are all very, very tired, and just these power supplies are not really been doing their job at all. Clearly none of this stuff's been touched. So we'll go on and replace some of that stuff now, and start to put this thing back together. Here's the unit complete and back together then, and all of these capacitors, all these low level capacitors have all been changed, and they're all changed for high temperature parts. And then I've obviously got some spacing here that just helps with the heat, and there's another mod that I do that just drops the voltage on these capacitors down to about 90 volts. So it's about 10% lower, and that means that these guys are getting driven less hard, and then the regulators that are following them are driven less hard. So it just kind of pushes things in the right direction. And then we've removed the sort of daughter board that was there before, and we've got our signal path upgrade board here. This is just a little servo board. It's different from when I first done this upgrade. I had a slightly larger board, but the circuitry here is the same. It's just that I ran out of these original boards, and we've kind of just you know, done a fresher design, and just distributed the circuitry a little bit different, but functionality just the same, and performed very well. So that's us. We'll go. We'll just make a quick spectrum measurement on this and look at the distortion maybe, and see how we're behaving. Alright, so here we are after all our efforts then, and we're just looking at the spectrum here. The input's terminated, output's got an 8 ohm load, and we're just looking up to 20k here on the audio analyzer. And we're seeing something here flat around about the 110 mark. Let's just put some averaging on here and make it easier to see. So there we are, nice flat line there. I've got a few spikes at the sort of 1500 hertz, and that's quite normal. And such low level, we're not you know, they're not going to be too much concern there. So vastly different from where we started, and this is kind of just what we're expecting to see here. Let's have a quick look at the distortion here just before we wrap up this one. All right, here we are looking at distortion then, 10 watts out, and we're 0.002 something. So quite happy with that. That's just behaving as we expect here. So we're really done here. We'll go and have a listen to these and then let them soak for a while before sending them back. Alright, so that's both of these units now. They've all been recapped and fully tweaked up, and had the signal path board fitted in there, all up and running, sounding nice. The other unit, that was serial number 408. It was maybe not quite as bad as the 404. It was certainly functional, but in a bad way. You know, it still had the bulging capacitors, quite obviously bulging capacitors, and other dry, completely dry parts. So it wouldn't have been performing at all, but maybe not just as broken as the 404 we looked at. So of course I've been talking to the owner as I was going through this material here, and shared some of this video. And of course, understandably, having spent so much money having these things serviced by Cyrus, he wasn't too content. So he went and raised the issue with him. So this was the initial response from Cyrus, and it's very short and direct. It just says, well, this is kind of what you get. A few months after service, you can expect this. And it's just not a very satisfactory response at all. So of course the owner wasn't content with this, and you have to go through a dealer to actually deal with Cyrus, even when you're sending stuff back for service. So he got in touch with the dealer, and I'm not going to read all this. You can pause the video and look at this in detail if you're inclined. But the dealer has been basically super supportive here, because their reputation is on the line as well. So they've been super supportive. They've given Cyrus a hard time, and Cyrus have come round and said, yeah, we acknowledge things have maybe not been quite as they should be here. They talk about new management being in place, and they'll look at some changes, having seen what's happened here. And at the end, the owner got a refund. So that's a good result, and hopefully some good stuff will come out of this and help folks in the future. Anyway, we're all sorted now. So let's just let these amps settle in. We'll have a wee listen to them.